Hey, this is Leo for actualized.org. And in this episode, I'm really excited to be digging deep into the grand model of psychological evolution brought to us by Claire Graves and the guys from Spiral Dynamics. This is a really deep topic, and you're going to have some mind-blowing epiphanies if you stick with me. We have a lot to discuss, so I'm just going to go right into it. I have a lot of material that's kind of technical, that involves lots of research that has been done by amazing individuals in the last 100 years. One of them being Claire Graves, the other two being Beck and Cohen, who are the guys behind Spiral Dynamics. And also, I'm going to talk about Ken Wilber. I'm going to bring in some ideas from Eben Pagan and Wyatt Woodsmall. So these are amazing researchers, these guys. And the depth of insight that they have put together in creating this model, this is a model of how the human psyche develops, both for individuals, but also as societies. It might seem a little bit abstract. It might seem a little bit philosophical, like what does this have to do with improving my life or self-actualizing? You're going to see that it has an enormous amount to do with it. So let me first, before I start getting into all the technical details and the history and all the pieces of this model, let me just give you a little bit of why this is significant and why you should stick with me here and why it's going to be worth your time. All right. So imagine, if you will, that there was, like a roadmap or a path, a well-trodden path that human beings have walked down for thousands of years, because it just so happens that this human brain has a certain psychology to it. And the psyche, what we call the psyche, that includes all the different psychological aspects of the brain and the mind. What if that had a certain structure to it and it always tended to unfold in a certain very predictable way? Wouldn't it be useful to you if you're trying to self-actualize and trying to get the most out of your life and you're trying to evolve to your fullest potential as one of these psyches? Wouldn't it be worth it to you to study what this path is so you can see potential blind spots and obstacles that are on this journey? Wouldn't you like to know what the journey entails rather than just doing it the way that most people do, which is just kind of assuming that, hey, I'm the first one that's ever been alive. No one before me really counts. Let me reinvent the whole wheel. Let me make all the mistakes myself. And let me not even look at the research that has studied thousands, tens of thousands of individuals and has found common patterns between the problems that they have as they're evolving their psyche. Wouldn't it be worthwhile for you to figure that out, to take a look at that research and to see, oh, there's that thing up ahead. Maybe I can avoid it a little easier now that I know that it's there. Well, that's exactly the benefit. So it really helps to know what the path is like. And you know what? This might come as a shock to you, but you're not the first human being that's been born onto this planet. There have been billions before you. That being the case, why reinvent the wheel? Why not take a look at what has already been discovered? Let's use the wisdom discovered in prior generations and from all the studies that have been done on entire demographics of peoples and use that to our advantage. Also, wouldn't it be cool to have a model that would help you to understand why human beings behave in the ways that they do? Why are they so irrational? Why do they hold such crazy beliefs? Why do they start wars? Why do they have relationship problems? Wouldn't it be cool to understand why that is happening on a very deep and fundamental level? Wouldn't it also be cool to understand why we have the social problems that we do? Why we have certain political problems, why we have certain economic problems, why we have certain factions within society that fight each other or wage influence campaigns, political campaigns against one another, or that demonize each other? Wouldn't it be cool to understand why that's happening? Might be useful, don't you think? And also, wouldn't it be cool to know how to speak to certain groups and certain populations of people because you understand where they're coming from psychologically so that you could lead them. If you want to be a leader, so that you could lead them and you could speak to them in your message instead of clashing with their beliefs, actually dovetailed with them. And so that they understood you, they're able to hear you, and you can understand them. Wouldn't that perhaps be useful to you as you're trying to go out there and maybe live your life purpose, or starting a business, or creating that dream career of yours? Just maybe. Just maybe. I'm throwing it out there for you. And I think that perhaps the biggest and most significant thing is that wouldn't it be nice to see the blind spots created by your psyche, by your ego? Because if you studied personal development at all, at any great length, then you know that it's you who is your own greatest enemy. And it's the blind spots created by your ego that are the real obstacles on this journey of self-actualization. So wouldn't it be cool to learn from others what those blind spots are so that you can maybe get a little bit more awareness into what they are for you? That's the significance of this model. All right. Now, what I'm going to be giving you here is kind of a hodgepodge of a bunch of different research and ideas from different people, mostly from Claire Graves, Beck and Cohen from Spiral Dynamics, Eben Pagan and Wyatt Woodsmall, who I actually took a whole seminar, a 25-hour seminar I watched on just this model. Some of you bitch and moan that my videos are long. No. Try sitting through 25 hours of just what I'm telling you here for 25 fucking hours. All right? Now, if someone does a seminar for 25 fucking hours on one topic, you would probably think that that would be an important topic for you to know. So maybe it's worthwhile for you to invest an hour of your time just to get a cursory overview. I'm not going to give you all the depth. I'm just going to scratch the surface for you here. This topic goes extremely deep. And if you can master this, man, you are going to be in the top 0.001% of the entire global population for understanding human psychology and for understanding social psychology, and also in your own personal development. So let's get into it. So basically, what are we talking about here? What do we mean by psychological evolution? And this whole topic basically falls under the theme of developmental psychology. So what is developmental psychology? Well, what's interesting is that they discovered that the psyche, the way it evolves and grows, there's actually a directionality to it. Meaning that it takes certain steps forwards and it doesn't really take those steps backwards, which is kind of interesting. And here's just one example. Carol Gilligan, who's a psychology researcher, she did some famous research, and she did research on feminine morality. So she wanted to see, how does the female mind cope with moral questions as it matures and develops? What happens? And what she did, she ran some studies, and one of the studies she ran went like this. She just went around and asked women, do women have a right to an abortion? That's what she did. And then she got basically three types of answers. The first answer was yes. The second answer was no. And the third answer was yes. But now we need to dig into the reasoning behind each one. So the first answer went like this. It was basically, yes, women have a right to an abortion because that's what I say, and what I say is right, and you can either take it or leave it. That was the justification. Now, the second answer was no. And the justification for that no was, no, women cannot have an abortion because society or my religion or my belief system or the Bible says that it's wrong. And so therefore, no. And then the third answer was, yes, they can have an abortion in certain circumstances. You have to take into account a lot of different aspects of this issue, and in certain situations, you can see that having an abortion is a lesser evil rather than the greater evil. So you make a pragmatic choice, and in that situation, it's a yes. Now, what's interesting is that as she did this study, what she discovered is that someone who answers first in their maturity level, the first yes, Later on in life, they might evolve to a no. And then later on in life, they might evolve to the next level of yes, which is the yes which is conditional on circumstances, the picking the lesser of the two evils. And what she discovered is that people move up this chain of levels, but they don't move back down. So it's never the case that someone says yes under certain circumstances when you analyze the facts and the situation and it's the lesser of two evils, then you can say abortion is okay. They never regress back down to saying yes because what I say is right and that's the end of the story. Or they never regress down and say no because the Bible says it's wrong. And this is a very interesting finding. It starts to show, and this is just one example, one case study here, or one study out of many, many studies, which I'm not going to go into, that show that there is a certain directionality to how the psyche develops. Morally, spiritually, within relationships, within one's attitude towards the world, within the way that one views religion and belief systems, with one's attitude towards society and the world at large. There's like a maturation process there. Maturity happens, and that maturity has a direction to it. Now, if we're doing self-actualization work, wouldn't it be nice to know what that direction is and where the arrow is pointing us to? Like, what the hell is over there? And where am I on this scale? Am I down here? Am I in the middle somewhere? Or am I moving over here? And what's above me, if there is something above me? And that's exactly what we're going to talk about now. So the research here mostly comes originally from Clare Graves. Who is Clare Graves? He is a researcher back in the 1950s. And what he did is he was a psychology researcher at a university in America. And basically what he did is he just got curious about interviewing and talking to various undergraduate students that were coming through his university. And there was a lot of students coming through. Foreign students, local students, hundreds and thousands of students. So what he did is over the course of like 5 or 10 years, he would actually take every new student that would come to the university. He'd sit them down and he would interview them and ask them questions. And then he would run some various assessments that he developed on them to see what's their thinking like, what's going on in their heads. And the question that he asked them, it was really a simple question. It's like, what are your values? What do you value? What do you find meaningful and important in life? And what he discovered after doing a lot of this kind of questioning and questioning thousands of students, both men and women, is he discovered that, there are certain patterns. Values are not just random. There seem to be patterns. Not only are there patterns, but again, there's a directionality to the values. It seems that certain people hold one set of values, but then later in life, those values evolve, and then those evolve, and those evolve, and those evolve. So where are they all evolving to? And here's what he discovered. And this has been kind of confirmed from many other angles because there's been a lot of research done. It's a whole field. This is called developmental psychology. And if you want, you can go and read books and study all the technical stuff that they've discovered about this. But what I'm going to give you now is I'm going to give you the Graves model. It's got stages on it. There's like 7 stages. And then spiral dynamics, which is kind of taking the Graves model and then developing and evolving it even further with some practical applications. That was developed by Beck and Cohen, and they published a book called Spiral Dynamics, which goes into a lot of depth on this stuff. And what they did is they took the original Graves levels and they gave them colors. Colors are just like labels to help you to identify and remember what these stages are. So here I'm going to give you these stages. Now these stages are very, very interesting because these are the major stages through which human beings evolve. This happens both individually, so it'll happen for you in your life. It also happens collectively. So it'll happen to your country. It'll happen to your business. It'll happen to your family. All right? So this is extremely, extremely applicable. So let's get into these stages. The first stage, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on it because it's not where most people are. It's called beige, the color beige. And what it is it's basic organism survival. So here, what the organism is doing is it's realizing like, hey, I'm an organism, I was born, I exist, and I need to survive. So the organism basically just uses its innate instincts to meet its biological needs for food, for water, for warmth, for safety, for sex. Just the basic stuff. So you might think of it as like, a very animalistic way of life. And what are some examples of beige that you might see? Well, for example, babies or infants are in the beige stage because they're not really interacting with other people. They're not really, cognitively developed yet. They're just kind of like surviving as an organism. They're struggling just to survive. Also, the mentally ill, they're just basically struggling to survive and just kind of meeting their basic biological needs. Also, senile elderly people. And perhaps you might think of a bum on the street who's a little bit like got a few screws loose in his head and is just kind of surviving on the streets. And so every one of these stages, you're going to see that there's like patterns to these stages. So we're going to kind of go through and we're going to talk about each stage, and we're going to talk about what the stage is about. We're going to give characteristic examples of each stage so you can practically know what it means and where you find it in your life. And also you're going to have something called the transformational dilemma. Each stage has a transformational dilemma, which is kind of like you might think of it as the barrier from stage 1 to stage 2. Like, why is there even 2 stages? It's because there's a barrier between the two. And that's what Eben Pagan and Wyatt Woodsmall call the transformational dilemma. And for each stage is slightly different. The barriers are different. And so for beige, the dilemma is that, well, yes, I'm an organism and I'm living here and maybe I'm surviving just fine, but there's other organisms around me. And so now I need to learn how to interact with those other organisms. And so I can't just really survive off on my own. I have to survive collectively with other organisms. So me just focusing on meeting my own biological needs, that's not sufficient to really survive and thrive. And so I have to transcend and move into the next stage if I really want to survive and thrive in the world. And so then the next stage comes. And the next stage is called purple. That's the color. And the key labels here are magic and tribal. Purple, magic, tribal. What is this stage? Well, here you have the first tribes or groups of human beings coming together. So you have ethnic tribes. And this is like, think about how human beings probably lived 50,000 years ago. Very, very basic. Before there was even civilization, before there was even really societies, people lived in tribes of maybe 20 or 50 individuals, maybe 100 individuals. You can still find such tribes living in remote parts of the world. So maybe tribes in the Amazon or tribes in Indonesia, they have these tribes, or tribes in Africa. So they're living in this purple stage. This is not just describing the social structure, it's also describing the individual's psyche, because the social structure is kind of a outgrowth, you might say, of the psyche. Now, what characterizes the purple magic tribal psyche? Well, it sees the world as a very mysterious place, fundamentally, because it doesn't have science, it doesn't have philosophy, it doesn't have a lot of advanced technology. It's just very basic and very primitive. And also, it needs to protect itself from dangers from the environment, which are still very serious because you don't have technology to protect you. And also, you need to protect yourself against other tribes, because one of the most dangerous things when you're living as a human being in a tribe is not lions and crocodiles. It's other tribes. Other tribes will come and kill you, and they'll steal your women and they'll rape them, right? And they'll murder all your children. So you need to protect your tribe. So it's really much very centered on tribalism. Not only that, not only are you living as part of a tribe, and really your identity is not as an individual the way we think of ourselves nowadays. It's mostly as a unit of the tribe. You're like a school in a big, you're like a fish in a big school of other fish, like a little fish in something larger. So in a sense, you're like a little piece of a larger organism, and that is the tribe. Now, this seems pretty foreign to us because we don't live in tribes anymore. But still, this is our heritage. This is where we came from. Also, this kind of psyche, the magic psyche, why do they call it magic? They call it magic because this kind of mind, who's not familiar with rationality yet or science, it thinks in supernatural ways. And so it sees the world as inhabited by powerful spirits, ancestral spirits or ghosts or different deities. It also thinks of the world in terms of good and evil. Like, good is everything that's good for the tribe, and evil is everything that's bad for the tribe. So what's the most evil thing for one tribe? It's the neighboring tribe who they're at war with. That's what is most evil, right? So you make demons out of your nearby neighbor tribes. Or maybe you make alliances with them, and then they're friends. So this is how the mind thinks. What are some examples of this purple stage? Well, we already said the Amazon tribes. Voodoo, practicing voodoo might fall into this category. How about folk remedies? There's all sorts of weird folk remedies that you might find in the third world as far as like medicine goes. It's not necessarily rational. It might be like very far-fetched and kind of mystical or mythological, or who knows if it even works or not. It's kind of like just weird, right? Modern science wouldn't approve. So this is what I call folk remedies. Also, clan warfare, very characteristic of this stage. Magic rituals. You might see people in the Amazon, putting on masks and then dancing and hollering and going into some ritual and then maybe, slaughtering some animal, this kind of thing, because they believe it appeases the gods. So this is very much part of the purple stage. And the classic medicine man, the witch doctor, also a part of this stage. What is the transformational dilemma of this stage? Well, the barrier that keeps these people from moving on to the next stage is basically this, that they're very much identified with the tribe, and what they need to do is they actually need to let go of the tribe. And one of the problems is that you, in this stage, have to really sacrifice your individuality for the sake of the tribe, right? You kind of become this tribal zombie. And also you're sacrificing for the tribe. And as you're doing this, you kind of get this idea like, hey, why the hell am I giving away all my power? And why the hell am I being an equal in this tribe? Why am I not dominating everyone here? If I dominate everyone in the tribe and I become the leader of the tribe, that would be much more beneficial to me. That would be quite lucrative. And so that opens the door to the next stage. And the next stage is called red, and it's egocentric power. This is pure, unadulterated use of power for self-gratification. So you have an impulse, and you want to satisfy that impulse immediately, and to hell with what other people think about it, or how it might affect other people. So, if I can go steal that person's farm and his woman, then I'll just go do that. To hell with them. I don't care about them. It doesn't matter to me how they feel. It doesn't even matter to me what the future consequences might be. It doesn't even matter that I might endanger myself by going and starting a war with that farmer. I just want his farm. And I'm powerful, and I have powerful friends, and I have powerful weapons that I've developed. So I'm just going to go and take what I want. That's the characteristic type of thinking of the red psyche. It wants to fight for physical domination. And it has a total disregard for rules. So all the rules that were set up and kind of the social norms that were set up in the society, when you go to red, you break all those. You try to distance yourself from all those. And in fact, you use them to your advantage in order to become more powerful or more wealthy. So what are some examples of red? Well, For example, a gang leader or a dictator. Or another good one is the mafia or any criminal, maybe a con artist or a James Bond villain. I like that one. Think of a James Bond villain. It's like they're totally egocentric. They don't care about who they're stepping on. They're ready to destroy the entire world as long as they get what they want. And of course, the dilemma for people that are in red is that this kind of impulsive thinking that they do, they don't really think too far into the future. This impulsive thinking, their need to gratify themselves right now, in the moment, is very disastrous in the long run for them and for anyone who's following them. Another problem is that physical force becomes unsustainable. You can't just go around killing people all the time. I mean, you can for a while, and that's what a dictator does. But inevitably, every dictator gets deposed because people don't like being dictated and people don't like being murdered, and so they don't tolerate leaders who murder them. In the long run, they never do. And of course, there's another really deep problem, is that this type of behavior of just taking things without considering other people's feelings, it tends to hurt people close to you that you actually love, right? And so it really kind of backfires on this individual who's going really, really red. It starts to backfire, and they start hurting everyone around them. They start hurting themselves, and so it becomes unsustainable. And so then that opens up the door to the next level. Now, let me just pause for a second as we're going here to make a couple of comments. So first comment is that notice that there's an alternating pattern of the psyche fighting for itself and then the psyche sacrificing itself for the sake of the community. So what's interesting in these stages is that they alternate. So for example, the first stage, beige, it was me, 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 me. It was all about me. The second stage, purple, that was about the tribe. So there it was all about tribe, so other. Not me, but other. Then it alternates and comes back to red, which is again, me, 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 me. It's all about me. So what do you think happens when you go from red to the next stage? Right? It alternates again. And now it becomes about other again. Other. And we're going to see this pattern continue to repeat. Also notice that when you are in one of these stages, you generally don't recognize that you're in this stage. It's not clear to you. You're completely unconscious of this. So if I was talking this information right now to someone who's stuck in red, or someone who's in purple, or someone who's in beige, it would completely go over their head. They would have no idea of what I'm talking about. Also notice, not only do the stages not know that they exist, they also actively despise one another, which you're going to start to see as we move forward here. But what you're going to start to see, and I want you to look out for this, is just how much one stage fights and clashes with the next, because that's what actually kind of creates the compartment of a stage. For example, the tribe, it was here at purple, and it was all for the tribe. And then the next compartment is actually breaking away from that and creating the next stage. You have to kind of break away from those values and move to almost opposite values, which is like, fuck the society, fuck the tribe, I'm going to do exactly what I want. And they're going to obey me or I'm going to kill them. Right? So it's kind of the exact opposite. So you're swinging your pendulum. And it's really interesting how the psyche works, because basically what it's doing is the psyche is kind of swinging its pendulum from one side to the other side, back to the next side, and to the next side. And so it just kind of swings like this as you're moving up this staircase. And you're going to see this more and more as I explain more of these stages. Also notice that you probably have a tendency to judge these stages as I describe them. So in your mind, you might be saying, oh yeah, stage red, that's the bad stage. No. There's not a good and a bad stage. The next stage is not necessarily better than the old stage. We're just kind of scientifically describing a pattern of development to the psyche. Also notice that each of these stages comes in a sequence, and you don't just get to skip stages. So it's not like you go from beige, being a person who's just concerned about biological survival, and then you jump straight to red, egocentric power lust, and you become a dictator. No, you go through the intermediate stage, which is tribalism. You have to go through that. And only after you've gone through it and you lived through it and you've passed through that hurdle, the transformational dilemma of tribalism, which is that, it's not really that cool to always be sacrificing for the tribe. You have to pass through that barrier to then enter into red. Then you have to break through that barrier to go into the next one, right? So what's very interesting here is that if we can peg you at one of these stages, then we'll know what the next stage is for you, and we'll know exactly what you need to do to evolve past it. You seeing the power of this? Okay, good. So let's move on from red to now blue. What is blue? Blue is called absolutist, conformist rule, or civilization. This is where we have civilization emerge. We had tribes before, which were not real societies. Then we had this kind of chaos and lawlessness, this kind of gangsterism, this kind of mafia rule and dictatorship, which, it's really hard to build a civilization when there's bloodbaths going around everywhere. So what's necessary to build a civilization? Well, the psyche has to, again, go from self, swing from self to other, because civilization is about other. So here, the psyche is sacrificing self for society. And how does it do that? Tradition, rule of law, heritage, family, obedience. These are the values that a person in blue really identifies with. There's a strong belief in good and evil. There's a strong belief in a God and a devil. And there's a strong certainty that absolute truth exists and that you know absolute truth. There's only one religion. All other religions are false religions. Only your religion is the true religion. Likewise, there's only one God, one true God, and he's the one that you know, and all others are false. In this kind of thinking, there's a cultural monism, what's called cultural monism. What does this mean? It basically means that you don't recognize a plurality of cultures in the world. You only see your culture as being the only valid culture. So it's kind of like you're culturally blind, right? And there's a sense of cultural superiority. So of course, your culture is the only really valid culture. Your culture is the noble culture. And all other cultures, they're heathens and barbarians. This type of psyche sees the world and the universe as simple, rational, and able to be broken down into very rigid categories. There's not a lot of gray area here. The world is black and white. Here's how you do it. This is how you build a society. We have these rules. We have these laws. We have these customs and traditions. This is what you do. It says so in the book. Go read the book. You don't agree? Go read the book. If you don't follow the laws, we're going to lock you up or we're going to kill you, because we can't just have people running around and, behaving like gangsters or dictators. That creates too much chaos to sustain a civilization. So we're going to lock you up, put you in prison. That's how this type of thinking goes. And here there's an emphasis on, sacrificing for the family, sacrificing for the country, sacrificing for your nation, that sort of thing. And of course, protecting your civilization from all neighboring civilizations, because you don't want to be conquered by a neighboring civilization. So you want to preemptively attack them, or you want to convert them. Maybe even better yet, we'll go find those heathens and we'll convert them. We'll give them our Bibles and we'll teach them our language and we'll teach them our customs. And either they convert or we kill them. That's the attitude here. And there's no questioning this. If you question this, you're a heretic. If you're questioning this, we exile you, we imprison you, we put you under house arrest, or we kill you. Doesn't even particularly matter if your disagreement is based on factual evidence. Maybe you found some new science that tells us that something we believe isn't quite true. Well, but it says in the book it's true. Look, the book says it's true. So it must be true. We've been doing it for 10,000 years, so must be the right thing to do. We've been doing it for so long, it's correct. Tradition is important. You can't go against tradition. That's how blue thinks. Now notice, now we're starting to get into this territory where actually you might start to identify with one of these stages. Beige, purple, red, those stages are hard to find in the civilized world. Why? Because those stages were all kind of killed off and civilization has overtaken those. But as we keep going, you're going to start to identify more and more with this type of thinking. Also notice that you might have a lot of disdain for this type of level. So if you're at a higher level and you're looking down on blue, you might be thinking to yourself, man, these people are crazy. How can they be so dogmatic? How can they be so certain? How can they be so black and white in their thinking? How can they be so rigid? How can they not see the limits of their thinking? This is characteristic of every stage. Every stage that looks down on the stage right before it sees that stage as either stupid, crazy, or criminal, or insane. One of those. This is a key insight. Key insight. Like 90% of the world's conflicts that are happening right now and that have happened through all of history come from this one insight right here. And what's interesting is that the stage that you're at right now, whatever that ends up being, what's kind of shocking to realize is that there's always a stage above you. And that as much as you might think that you're at the top and you're as good as it gets, and that everyone below you you've kind of surpassed, and they're all crazy and stupid and criminal, well, you look crazy, stupid, and criminal and insane to the stages that are above you. Now that's a bitter pill to swallow. But if you can swallow that pill, that's where you get some massive personal development right there. And I'll point that out to you as we go. So what are some examples of blue? To me, what comes to mind is the Islamic world. The Arabic Islamic world is very, very traditional. It's very rigid kind of system. In the West, we've kind of moved a little bit away from blue, and we've moved more towards the other stage, which I'm going to get into in a second here. But like think about the Iranian government, for example. It's like a religious rule government. Think about other examples such as fundamentalism. And there are all sorts of different forms of fundamentalism, from Islamic fundamentalism to terrorism to fundamentalism even in America. And you got fundamentalism pretty much in every country. If you don't even need to look that deep. We have a pretty strong streak of fundamentalism here in the US, actually. The Bible Belt, very blue absolutist. Conservatives, politically, conservatives are absolutist blue. Think about the Amish. How do the Amish live? They live in this kind of system, right? It's a very rigid system where you have almost no individuality. There's no real value for freedom or expressing yourself. Why? Because you're sacrificing all that frivolous shit for society to make civilization strong. And also, very interestingly, I would put Zen Buddhism in this category right here. Zen Buddhism, and I'll cover that a little bit more as we go on. But basically, Zen is a very rigid way of doing spirituality. It's like, you do it this way. There are these rules. If you don't obey this, then I'm going to hit you over the head with a stick. That's blue spirituality for you right there. Of course, Christianity, Catholicism, all the major religions Islam, all completely blue. See, what's interesting is that when you have a very rigid and hierarchical religion, bureaucratic religion, then it helps to stabilize and cement civilization. So these two kind of come hand in hand. And in fact, one of the characteristics of blue absolutist is that you have very rigid hierarchies and bureaucracy, because you need this in order to sustain a civilization. What's the transformational dilemma that keeps blue from advancing to the next stage? And what's the problem with blue? I mean, seems like it would be nice to have a great functioning civilization. So what's wrong with that? Well, the problem is that this kind of black and white thinking doesn't really work too well in a gray world. Reality is pretty complex and gray. And when you don't admit that, you have problems. Another problem in this stage, blue, is that you need to start to interact with the other cultures, and you have to start to see like, oh, my culture is not the only culture. There's other cultures around. There's people on other continents. The world is a big place. And I have to somehow reconcile the fact that, hey, my culture might actually not be superior to that culture over there. It just might be a little different, but not superior. Another problem is that the ego, because the ego was sacrificing for society here, after a while of doing that, the ego gets hungry again for individual success because the pendulum has swung this way. And now it kind of wants to swing back because maybe it's swung a little too far in the self-sacrificing direction. And the other thing, of course, is that these rules and categories and hierarchies that are created by civilization, these caste systems, they tend to be pretty oppressive. And, we like freedom. We don't want to be oppressed, especially if you find yourself on the wrong place in the hierarchy. I mean, if you're at the top, you're happy. But if you're at the bottom of the hierarchy, you're not happy. So you want to change in that system. So what happens? Well, after a while, you get fed up with all that shit and you want to move up. And you want to move up into the next level, which is orange. Orange is individualistic. Now we get individualism. And there's a focus on success, and now also science comes into play. Now we got science. So here we're getting into what most of you who are watching this video are probably in, this stage orange. And thinking about myself, I think a good chunk of me is in this orange. And this is where most of Western society is right now, is in orange. So let's describe orange in quite some detail. What is orange? Orange believes that the point of life is basically material abundance and comfort. Also, the point of life is scientific progress, technology. What we're going to do is we're going to use science and technology, which has been working so great. We can use it to manipulate the world to create the most comfortable and exciting and easy world that we can possibly live in. And we're going to make ourselves happy by all this cool technology. And we're going to allow ourselves to express ourselves now. We're not going to deny ourselves. We're not going to sacrifice for society. Now we're becoming savvy consumers. And so I'm an individual thinker now, and I value freedom and liberty and all this. And I'm a real smart consumer. I'm a real picky consumer. I'm going to go and I'm going to go buy the things that I really like to buy. I'm going to wear the things I like to wear. I'm going to get the sunglasses that look cool on me. I'm going to get the cool car. I'm going to get the nice house. I'm going to impress everyone with the stuff that I own. And I'm going to be happy. That's how orange thinks. Also, with orange comes the rise of business. Power is no longer really in the hands of civilization and kind of government. Power shifts into business. Now it's the economy, stupid. It's the economy that's most important. It's money that runs the show. With money, I can buy anything I want. I can control governments. I can buy the government if I want with enough money. And so here you have big businesses growing up, right? You've got the stock market. You've got progress at all costs. How do we keep the economy growing? The worst thing that can happen is that the economy stops growing. that puts a wrench into the wheels of the whole orange paradigm, right? Because we need more progress. We need faster progress. We want to be working 2,000 hours a year. We want to be working ourselves to death in the name of progress and material abundance. Orange, again, shifts towards ego, away from selflessness, towards ego. But it's different than it was with red, because red was also about ego. Whereas red ego was about like, I'll just kill you if you don't give me what I want, like total blatant disregard for others. Orange actually cares about others to some degree. So orange is not going to go out of his way to just like totally damage and obliterate other people. So a person at orange is not going to go murder you if you don't give him your wallet. But orange will manipulate and scheme and plot and do something more like white-collar crime. So maybe he'll scam you, or maybe he'll come up with some system that will just kind of get as much money from you as possible, sell you some cheap little flimsy product, and exploit you. So here it's kind of like business exploitation starts to happen. So what are some examples of orange? Wall Street as an institution is totally orange, right? It's just like me, give me the most money I can get, screw everyone else, in the sense that I don't care like if it bankrupts the taxpayers. I don't care if it kills the company. I don't care if it hurts the shareholders. I'm just going to get as much money as I can from this stock deal and fuck everybody else. It's not going to kill them, but it'll hurt them financially. But yeah, I'll just rationalize that away because, hey, I got to take care of number one first. I need to buy that jet and that yacht and that house because that stuff's going to make me happy. See how the psyche is thinking this stuff? You see how the institutions and the customs of the society at this stage actually come out of the psyche's thinking about these things. Another example is just CEOs. Think about CEOs, modern CEOs with golden parachutes who earn $50 or $100 million a year and are totally unashamed of it, even though they're earning 1,000 times more than the people that are working under them. Think about the modern businessman as an example. Think about the scientist. The scientist is also orange. What is the scientist doing? He's fighting for truth and progress, for rationality. And science is often in league with business. So business funds science. Scientific research comes a lot from the business sectors. So those two, just like you had the state and the religion in blue, in orange is business and science. Now that's the alliance there. That's important. Think about the corrupt politician. What's the corrupt politician doing? He's not a dictator. He's not doing something as bad as a dictator is. But he's taking some money on the side here. He's selling a vote here. He's kind of currying favor with lobbyists here. Maybe he shouldn't be doing that or whatever. But he does it anyways. Why? Because he can buy his wife a nice, third or 10th house or whatever, and he can take her to the Bahamas and shit like that. So, it's like a selfishness there. Republicans as a political party, very orange. They're both kind of orange. They can also be blue. Because remember we said conservative is an example of blue? Well, orange, so Republican is like a camp, it can have some blue people in it, can have some orange people in it. Why? Because, hey, lower my taxes. I don't want to be paying for all this shit for society. Fuck that. I want to keep as much of my taxes as I can so I can spend it on shit for me. I don't care about the poor. I don't care about healthcare. I don't care about all this bullshit. I just care about me. It's just all about me. They'll figure out how to fend for themselves. Everyone should fend for themselves, right? I mean, look, I had to fight real hard to get to where I am now. That person's a bum. He's lazy. He's not fighting for it. So he doesn't deserve as much as I have. I deserve it. I worked hard for it. I had to fight for it. Maybe I even had to scam someone for it or construct some sort of business that sucks some money out of somebody. Other examples? Well, probably you. You are probably here. or some aspect of your psyche is somewhere in this ballpark. And you know what? If I'm really honest, then I have to admit that I'm probably in this zone too. At least some psyche, or a good chunk of my psyche, maybe a third of it, is in this zone at where I am in my development. Okay, so you might say, well, Leo, what's the problem with being, success-oriented and science? Isn't science good? And individualism and freedom, those are all great virtues. What's wrong with that? Well, I mean, it's a step up from blue, but there's something above orange. The transformational dilemma for orange is that materialism does not get you happiness. So all the shit that you're doing in your life that you think is going to make you happy, once you do it all and you get it all, and you sell yourself for money, you realize like, oh shit, I'm still not happy. What do I do now? Also, you start to realize and become conscious of the fact that your selfishness is hurting other people. Not as bad as it used to when you were red, but it's still hurting quite a few people. And also now what starts to happen is that we have a huge civilization and we have the earth. And as we're doing business and as we're filling our bellies with materialism, so to speak, we're destroying the resources of the planet. And here you have these problems with, companies who just shamelessly rape the planet, strip rainforests and drill for oil and spill it everywhere and don't give a shit about anything as long as they're increasing their shareholder profits. That's all they care about. So that starts to become a big problem because after a while, at first that works. But if you do that for a couple hundred years, what happens is the planet starts to get destroyed. And you as orange living in an orange world getting polluted and kind of toxified by all the shit that orange people have been doing, you look around and you're like, wait a minute, guys, hold on. Can we keep doing this forever? I mean, what happens when like the ice caps melt and we all fucking drown because we've put so much CO2 into the atmosphere? What happens then? Well, then you start to realize like, oh shit, maybe my being orange and my chasing for money and just selling myself out has kind of like robbed me of my humanity and put me out of touch. And also, there really is some damage that I'm doing to people, to the environment, and so on. Okay, so once you realize that, what happens? Then you move on to the next stage. And what stage is that? That one is called green. Green is relativistic, it's caring, and it's communal. Those are the key words. So what happens here is again, the pendulum swings back towards other away from self. There's a return to humanity. There's a return to humanistic values. There's a return to spirituality. There's a rejection of shallow materialism. I no longer care about just getting money or making money. Now what I care about is connecting with people. It's all about relationships. It's all about connecting with others. It's about understanding others. It's about peace and love. That's what we need in the world. How do we heal the world after all the damage that orange people have done? Well, we heal it through sharing and caring. Also, we have to recognize the validity of other cultures. So, we need to preserve every culture on the planet. No culture is superior. No religion is superior. They're all different and unique in interesting ways, and we need to preserve them all. Not only do we need to preserve them, we need to help the poor. We need to make sure they have health care. We need to make sure that people have fair wages and that they're not getting exploited by business. We need to have unions to protect us from big business and from those greedy CEOs. Also, we need to look out for the environment because the environment is getting destroyed and Mother Earth is what, allowed us to be born in the first place. And also, while we're talking about Mother Earth, we need to protect the species that are here because every day hundreds of species are dying because of human activity. So we need to prevent that. We need to protect all the endangered species, make sure that they're all safe and secure, and that we're preserving the planet for future generations. You see what I'm doing? I'm kind of taking on the voice of green. This is how green thinks. This is how green talks. This is what green values. There's a real turn towards empathizing now with other organisms, human and even non-human, right? There's a deeper empathy here. You start to care more about the feelings of others. An Orange CEO doesn't really care if he builds his new oil drilling station on some natural reserve. He doesn't care. A green CEO would be like, no, guys, wait a minute. We have to run a sustainable company. If we're going to drill for oil, we have to do it in a very sustainable way. Let's go someplace in the middle of the desert where there's no one that we can harm, and we'll put the oil drilling station there. And we'll make sure that even though yes, we're gonna sacrifice some profits, but it's okay. We're gonna explain it to the shareholders, and we're gonna try to tell them that actually we're doing good in the world by making this decision. Right? That's how a green CEO would think. What are some other examples of green? Democrats lean green. Of course, hippies, New Agers, the whole New Age movement. Greenpeace, great example. Liberals in general. Progressives. Social workers. Think of a spiritual meetup group. That would be very green. Also, people in academia tend to skew green. Think about support groups where people come together and share their feelings and provide emotional support for each other. And I like the example of Care Bears. The Care Bears are very green. You can call someone a Care Bear. What does that mean? That means that they just have this bleeding heart that they care so much for everybody. Now, what's the problem with green? The problem with green is that it's overly idealistic. Yes, you're caring and you're sharing and all this, but the problem is that just caring and sharing doesn't solve the world's problems. You're not going to save polar bears just by caring about them, and you're not going to solve the AIDS epidemic by just caring about people with AIDS, and you're not going to feed the poor with just care and love. You need real, tangible solutions for that. So green starts to see after a while of caring and sharing and spilling their hearts out that that's not helping the world as much as we need it. And the other problem is what I call false spirituality. So people in green, they tend to go to yoga, they tend to meditate, they tend to read spiritual stuff, hippies. But actually, they're not really spiritual. They don't understand what spirituality really is. It's kind of like a very shallow, surface level spirituality. It's all the accoutrements of spirituality without the real depth of spirituality. So that's the problem with green. Now notice, it's interesting, because if you're orange and you're listening to me talking about green, you might be saying to yourself right now, wait a minute, Leo, what are you smoking? Green is not above orange. Green should be below orange. I'm scientific and rational, and you're telling me that the hippies are above me? No. You got it backwards. But yeah, I got a bitter pill for you to swallow. The hippies are above you. And what's going to happen for you if you're an orange, chances are you are an orange, is that you're going to have to deal with that transformational dilemma that we talked about of how your selfishness is hurting the world and how your lack of care for others is ultimately coming back and hurting you, and how your shallow materialism and progress and your championing of spirituality, how ultimately that's not making you happy. And that's not solving the world's problems. You have to recognize after a while that, shit, that's a real problem. You have to admit that and accept that. And only then what will happen is that you will move up to green. And then actually you will start to care more about the world. Your circle of concern is going to expand out beyond you. Now for orange, that seems very distasteful. Well, I got news for you. Going over the barrier to the next stage is always distasteful. How do you think Blue felt when he had to move into orange? He felt extremely unhappy and afraid of doing that. because blue was thinking that, shit, orange is the enemy, because orange is all individualistic. Individualism was going to destroy society. That's exactly, for example, how Islamic states and Arab nations think, right? They're very rigid with their rules because they think that if they relax their rules, then like MTV and the gays will come in there and destroy their beautiful culture. And, in a sense, maybe that's what will happen. But nevertheless, that's kind of like where the psyche and the developmental line is going, is this way. Well, likewise with orange, orange has to let go of its selfishness to move into green. And it doesn't want to move into green because, like, shit, I don't want to be a hippie. Those hippies, they're lazy, they have no work ethic, they're so sappy and emotional, like, I don't want to turn into that. But that's kind of the bullet you have to bite. And then once you move through green, what happens? Well, green is not the end of it. But here's something very big and revolutionary happens. Because here we move from tier 1. Everything we've talked about so far has been tier 1. Now we move into tier 2. And tier 2 is a whole new shift. Why? Because tier 2 is called yellow. I mean, not the tier, but the next stage is called yellow. But yellow is in tier 2. It's systemic thinking and integration. I'll explain what that means in a second. But basically, the significance of the tiers is that yellow is the first stage that actually understands and is aware of all the prior stages. Green didn't know about green. Orange didn't know about orange. Blue didn't know about blue, and it didn't know about anything else. That's been true all the way up to yellow. Now when you get into yellow, oh man, you start to see this whole model. In a sense, this model, the Graves model that I'm explaining to you, this is a yellow development. Because now what's happening is now you're starting to see the world in a much more complex, many shades of gray sort of way. And what yellow is about systemic thinking. So life is gray for yellow. Life is very complex. Life is also paradoxical. Also, we have to start to see that people see reality from different perspectives and that there is no absolute truth. What there is there's multiple perspectives, and each perspective might have a partial half-truth to it. And we have to somehow reconcile all that. Yellow starts to see world problems as systemic problems, not personal problems. It's not like that country is evil or these people over here are stupid. It's not like that. It's that, no, society is evolving and society is this living, breathing organism, and it has certain structures. Now, certain structures are getting in the way of other structures. So if we want society to advance more smoothly, what we have to do is we have to come up with better systems and structures and make sure that every complex thing interacts with itself in the right way without hurting or sabotaging itself. And here you get into what's called ecology. Ecology is exactly this. It's systems thinking on a big scale. Yellow gets concerned about how do we solve world problems. How do we solve world problems not by just ramming our solution down someone's throat, but by actually understanding that person's perspective. Let's go study all these cultures. Let's understand what their problems are. Let's understand what levels of the hierarchy they're on. If we're going to be dealing with those people in Africa who are at red or at blue, or if we're going to be dealing with the Islamic world, which is blue, and if we're going to be dealing with Western societies, which are orange, and we want them to all interact together and communicate effectively and not kill each other, then we need to come up with some systems for how to make that happen. Let's go do some research. Let's learn. So yellow places a really high priority on knowledge and multiple perspectives. Yellow also places a high priority on competency versus bureaucracy and rank. So whereas before the people with the power were the ones who were in the best, highest position, well, yellow doesn't believe that that's right. Yellow thinks that, hey guys, let's put the smartest people in power. Let's elect a president who is like actually intelligent. Let's elect a PhD professor as the president, not just some charismatic guy who doesn't know anything about the world. Very different way of thinking. Yellow is an extremely rare, very tiny percentage of the population right now. Because yellow takes incredible open-mindedness. The kind of open-mindedness that most people are not willing to accept. It's frightening degrees of open-mindedness. It's also high levels of personal development is required to get here. You don't just get born and get here. You need to work really hard to get up here. Really hard, right? You need to be very self-honest. You need to be aware of the ego and how it works. You need to be working on yourself constantly. You need to be breaking through those transformational dilemmas at every stage, right? Imagine how many of those you had to break through to get to yellow. And each one of those is very distasteful to break through. Now notice, yellow, when you talk about yellow to someone who's in blue or in orange, what do they see? They see yellow as this relativistic space cadet who's just like lost in his head like a philosopher. That's what yellow looks like. Because everything is so complex and nuanced and gray. And there's like literally no more absolute truths for yellow. Imagine that. Imagine honestly approaching life as though there are no absolute truths. Everything is a perspective. Everything is a perspective. Science is a perspective. Religion is a perspective. Political parties are perspectives. Different cultures are perspectives. Think about that. That's not how most people think. Most people say, no, Leo, this is how it is. This is what I believe. This is what people told me. This is what I learned in school. This is what the Bible says. But you've transcended all that stuff to get up to yellow. Yellow is also chill and cool with all the other stages, to an extent. Why? Because yellow finally understands what's going on here. Yellow understands that there's multiple levels. Yellow understands that these levels fight with each other. Yellow understands that each level believes that it's the right level. And most importantly, is that yellow finally is conscious of the fact that it too is a stage and that it's not the highest stage and that there's something above it, an additional level. And yellow finally sees like, oh shit, there's another transformational dilemma ahead. There's a barrier. I have to pass through that barrier to move to the next level. But yellow is cool with that. Rather than resisting it, yellow's like, yeah, it's going to be a kind of a pain in the ass, but I got to do it because I'm just going to grow myself even more. So yeah, let's go do it. Let's go face that transformational dilemma. You might wonder, who are some examples of yellow? And this is hard. It's a little hard to pinpoint examples because they're not that common. They're quite rare. But I'll give you a couple of individuals. I think that Eben Pagan, who I think is one of the most incredible modern self-help guys out there who's working in the self-help field. Definitely, if you watch any of his material, it's got a very strong yellow flavor to it. Like multiple perspectives, very objective, kind of able to do the rational and the emotional, combine them together. Really cool guy. Also, Ken Wilber. Ken Wilber epitomizes yellow because he's got his whole approach to philosophy and to spirituality is like taking 20 different perspectives and integrating them all together and coming up with this kind of meta perspective from all the little perspectives. So these people tend to be like highly intellectual, highly complex people. They tend to be somewhat individualistic because, again, we shifted away from green, which was about other. Yellow shifts back more towards ego and self. But now the difference is that it's about self, but it's not about self and trying to hurt other people. It's about trying to be very responsible as a self. So it's like, yes, I'm earning money for myself. Yes, maybe I'm running a business, but I'm doing it in a very responsible way. I don't want to hurt other people. In fact, maybe what I want to do is I want to empower other people with this business that I have. Perhaps certain academics are in yellow. Maybe Albert Einstein. I don't know. Just kind of a guess. Maybe Albert Einstein was kind of pushing towards yellow. Or maybe he was green. Kind of hard to say. I don't know. I think maybe Barack Obama might be yellow. Because he's kind of a complex thinker. You see that, compare Barack Obama with George Bush. Actually, very interesting. George Bush was a blue and orange thinker. Barack Obama is probably like a green/yellow thinker. And it just shows in how they communicate, how they do interviews, stuff like that. Although I can't be totally sure. So what's the transformational dilemma for yellow? Well, yellow is stuck in his head a lot because yellow is building models for everything. Kind of reminds me of me. And then, but the problem is that just building models and having complex gray thinking still doesn't solve the world's problems. So you need to start to kind of accept that. Shit, I have to accept that. And then I have to move past that and move into the stage that's above me. And what's above me? It's turquoise. Turquoise is holistic global actualization. Here, you're really concerned about the whole globe. Again, we went from swinging your pendulum here at yellow to ego. Now it's swinging back to other, from self to other. Here, what starts to happen is the rational and the intuitive and the emotional all starts to synergize and come together. And here, I think that you start to get tastes of true spirituality, right? A real embrace of spirituality, but not in a dogmatic way, in a very open-minded and judgment-free type of way. And honestly, I have a hard time talking about what's at turquoise because I don't really understand turquoise. I don't know what's at turquoise, really. And I don't know who are examples of people at turquoise. I really don't know. So I'm not going to say much about that here. And that basically is what we've got. So we've got this whole spectrum. So take a look. Where are you on this spectrum? Kind of interesting to look. I'll give you a warning. If you're trying to peg yourself somewhere here, your ego will play a trick on you. And what it'll say this. Number one, it'll say, no, Leo, you've got the order of all these stages backwards. You're not right about this stuff. I'm orange. Maybe I'm orange or whatever you say I am. I'm orange, let's say. But, green and yellow, those aren't above me. Or you might say, oh, there's nothing above me. So that's one thing you might say if you're real stubborn. But if you're a little more smart and wise than that, then the next trick your ego will play on you, it'll say, oh, I'm not orange. I'm yellow. I'm not green. I'm turquoise. I'm not blue. I'm green. There's a pattern here. And the pattern is that the ego likes to think that it's 2 steps above where it actually is. So blue will skip past orange in its mind and go to green. Blue thinks it's green. Orange skips past green. Orange doesn't want to be a hippie. Skips past green, thinks it's yellow. Green doesn't really like the idea of yellow, and it skips past all the way to turquoise. That's what tends to happen. And of course, red doesn't like blue, but it skips over blue and thinks that it's orange. So like a criminal is not going to think of himself as a criminal or as red. He'll think of himself kind of like the Wall Street CEO. He'll justify it that way. So with that in mind, peg yourself. Also, take note that it's not that you're just in one of these categories. This is a general schematic, and where you actually draw the line is somewhat arbitrary. So you can be a mixture of these things. You could be 30% orange, 20% green, and some other percent yellow, or whatever combination. That's possible. Personally, for me, I think that I've got like at least a third orange, maybe even 50% orange. And then I've got maybe 20 or 30% green, and then another 20 or 30% yellow. And, if I'm in my lower self, then I'm skewing more towards orange. And if I'm in my higher self, then I'm skewing more towards yellow. And I'm kind of a little bit avoidant of green. Maybe. It's a little hard to judge yourself on these things, but just kind of gives you an example. So you can be a mixture. Also recognize, and this is important, is that these stages also happen along different developmental lines. So imagine different axes, if you will. For example, moral, the moral axis, spirituality, the spiritual axis, mind or cognition, the cognitive axis. There's also an emotional axis. There's a relationship axis. There's a sexuality axis. And so on each of these different axes, you can be at different stages. So this can turn into quite a complex model. So if you imagine like this bar chart, and you've got different, levels that you're at here. So you can be, in terms of morality, you could be at, let's say, green, very high. So this is an individual with highly developed sense of morality, and but has a very low, maybe, sense of spirituality. And then maybe he has a kind of medium sense of or development of his cognition abilities. And then his emotional awareness might be very low. And then maybe in relationships, he's a little bit higher. And so you can get this kind of complex matrix. So really, if you want to get technical and in depth, you can go and kind of find different assessments or read different books and find these different lines and axes and then actually kind of rank yourself on different places. But the moral of the story is that you kind of want to up yourself on all of these. Right? If you're trying to do personal development, you up yourself on all of these different axes, especially any one that's extremely low. So maybe you're really low with relationships, or maybe you're really low with spirituality, or maybe you're really low with sexuality. Then you gotta raise that up and you gotta pass through all those stages. Remember that you can't just skip stages. So if you're orange, you're not going to be able to skip to yellow. You have to go through green. You would like to skip to yellow, but you can't. Likewise, if you're blue, you're going to have to go through orange. You can't just skip to green either. So, some bitter pills to swallow. That's what's going to be necessary. The problem with the world, generally speaking, is that the stages do not understand that they exist. They hate each other. And in fact, they just can't even comprehend. It's baffling to one stage how the other stage thinks. And this is why we have war. This is why we have violence. This is why we have theft. This is why we have all sorts of problems, both individually and collectively. This is why we have problems with global warming. This is why we have problems with religion. This is why we have the Palestinian-Israeli problem. This is why we have the US versus the Islamic world problem. This is why we have terrorism problem. This is why we have economic collapse problems. This is why we have a Wall Street problem. It's all explained right here. That's the power of this model. Whew, a lot of information to digest. So you might be wondering, okay, Leo, so how do I actually use this to develop myself? This model is very good for building awareness. I'll probably shoot more videos in the future, like a part 2 or a part 3 to this series, that will tell you more about how to practically apply it. But just for now, what I want you to do is I want you to see and accept, first of all, that there are these stages and that they do have a trajectory, a directionality to them, and that you're probably much lower than you think you are or than you would like to be. And just if you can accept and start to appreciate and become conscious of just that right there, that will already help you a lot. Because what we really need more of in the world is we need people moving from tier 1 thinking to tier 2, from orange and green to yellow. Because yellow is the one that starts to understand this whole thing. And this understanding is very powerful because it actually makes you kind of chill and relaxed about all these different stages. You can also start to think about them. You can start coming up with solutions and ideas for how to solve world problems. Once you understand these things, you can become a strong leader. How about you peg your company on this hierarchy? You might be working for a company that's orange, or maybe it's red, or maybe it's green, or maybe it's blue. And if you're the owner of a company, if you're a CEO or if you're an entrepreneur, then you probably want to grow your company. Not only do you want to grow yourself, you want to grow your company through these stages too. Because guess what? The higher you go on this hierarchy, the more chance you have of surviving in this world. Because the fact is that the world is complex. It is evolving. Evolution is happening. And if you notice, people in beige and purple and red, those people are all dying out. Those structures are not sustainable once blue comes into play, once orange comes into play, once green comes into play. And what's going to happen in the future is that society, the whole world is just going to shift on this spectrum this way, right? Towards yellow. So I encourage you to be ahead of the pack, lead that move, evolve yourself first, evolve your company, evolve your relationships, evolve your family, evolve your friends up towards yellow. And the way you start to do that is just by getting a sense of this model. And how do you apply yellow thinking to the world? Well, you have to give away something that you've been cherishing for a long time, which is rationalism, very dogmatic rationalism, and absolute truth. You have to stop thinking of the world as having absolute truths. You have to start seeing the world as really being a collection of perspectives, in that every belief or idea that you have, no matter whether it's the most proven science to some social system theory, to your political systems, to your philosophical convictions, to your religious beliefs, to your spiritual convictions, any of that, those are all perspectives. Maybe there's some truth to them, but maybe there's also some untruth to them. That's a really bitter pill to swallow for most people. Most people cannot handle that. That takes extreme open-mindedness. Which is why in the future, and I've already started doing this with my videos with actualize.org, is I'm just going to keep hammering and hammering and hammering and just hammering on the idea of open-mindedness, because I think it's one of the most important ideas, both socially, but also just personally. It's so important, even though it sounds kind of abstract and a little woo-woo. It's super important, because the thing that's holding you back the most, whether you're at blue, orange, or even green, is dogma. Belief in your beliefs is holding you back. And how do you break your beliefs down? Well, that's a real can of worms that I'm not going to get into here, because we're already running long. Anyways, I'm going to wrap it up here. Think about all this stuff. Try to look at the world through this lens of yellow. Start seeing everything the way that a yellow person would see it. It's pretty cool. It might be a little scary, a little awkward, a little crazy, a little insane or criminal, but try it, right? One of the beauties of seeing this model is that now you can see what your obstacles will be in the future, the psychological obstacles, and now you can kind of anticipate them. Maybe you can even jump into the next level and just kind of swim around in it and see, oh, it's actually not so bad. You know, if you're orange, try going to some hippie commune or a meditation retreat. Hang around with hippie people, and their hippiness will start to rub off on you in a good way. You'll actually say, oh, hippies are not as bad as I thought they were. I'm personally doing that myself in my own life. And if you're blue, start hanging around with more orange people and just kind of accept them. and push yourself, even though you're resisting it, just push yourself into orange. And just you'll see like, oh, orange is kind of cool. I get to like be an individual. I like being an individual. And I have freedom. I like freedom. And I like to get money and, I can build the business. I like building a business. So you can see some of the benefits there. And if you're green, then come over to yellow. Start seeing the world in even more shades of gray. Stop just caring and sharing, and stop just being empathetic, but start seeing the world as perspectives and start coming up with systems for how to solve the problems in the world that you really care about. That will put you to yellow. All right, this is it. A lot of deep discussion here, a lot to think about. I'll let you digest it. I'm going to go. Leave me your comments down below. Please click the like button, share this video with a friend, and lastly, come check out actualize.org right here. I've got a free newsletter there, so you can stay up to date with future videos. I release new videos on self-actualization topics, really deep fucking videos, every single week, right? I don't know who else is putting out videos of this depth for free. It's pretty damn rare. So I hope that you can see the value in these models. You can use these models to transform your entire life. Not just your life, but the whole world. You want to become a leader in the world. You want to go out there and accomplish amazing things. You want to have a life purpose. You want to get your life not just handled, but like thriving. This is the information that you need. So stick with me. I've got a lot more deep stuff coming soon, and I will see you a bit later.